but we can start. And we'd just like to welcome all of you to this third New Perspectives webinar, which is part of our series on nation souls. And I'm Rade, I'm joined by Vladimir, and we are both here at the LaGrasse Shirabindo Integral Life Center in Fountain in South Carolina. And of course, joining us today are our esteemed guest speakers from Auroville, Jaya and Anu. Welcome, welcome Jaya and Anu. A pleasure and an honor to have you here with us. And before turning this over to Vladimir, who will be the moderator for today's panel discussion, I'd like to just mention a special event that LaGrasse will be hosting on October 8th. And I'm just going to screen share here to show you the event. And again, it's a full day event, and it is about In Search of Your Inner Guide. And you'll see here our keynote speaker is Dr. Brant Courtright, whom we've hosted several times on New Perspectives. And in this seminar, Dr. Courtright, as well as several other speakers, will discuss really how to find answers and directions in our life that are aligned with our innermost being, or that self that the mother says is the master and builder of our destiny. So it's intended to be also a very practical session. So we will be providing tools and experiential exercises to kind of help us tune in to this presence of our inner guide when making both major life decisions as well as just everyday choices that we're faced with. So we do hope you will join us either in Greenville at the Hyatt Regency or online for this enriching day of exploration and discovery. And I'll be putting in the chat box the link where you can find more information about this event and also register. So we hope to see you either on Zoom or at the Hyatt. At this time, let me unscreen share and turn it over to Vladimir. Vladimir.
Thank you, Radhe, and welcome all to this very important webinar, which is dedicated to the awakening of the nations. And Shirabindo says, when the soul awakens, that a nation is really alive, and the life will then manifest itself in all the manifold forms of activity in which man seeks to express the strength and the delight of the expansive spirit within. So the whole idea of the awakening of the nations and the souls is to give the platform, to give the field for these innermost expressions among people. And for that we need the support of the nation souls. And this topic we looked into with Sumitra Basu and Alok Pandey before. Sumitra Basu addressed the formations of the nation souls from the point of view of Sri Aurobindo, from the ideal of human unity. And Alok Pandey spoke about specific countries, how they express their own individual and unique features. And now we are coming to the most interesting and the most daring experience in the life of humanity. It's the formation of Auroville as the laboratory for this endeavor to manifest the actual human unity. And in Auroville, as we know, there are 4 zones, and one of which is the international zone, which is dedicated to the national pavilions. And so to address this topic in this light, we invited Anu, who is the member of the working committee, and Jaya, who is the curator of Unity Pavilion, that very pavilion which is supposed to help to manifest this human unity through our real experience. So we would like to invite you and to address the audience. Please, Anu, you start and Jaya will continue. Please, Anu.
Thank you, Vladimir and Radhe, for having us. You know, this experience of Auroville's international zone it's not something that is just there. You know, it's a city plan and we have this zone and that zone, or, you know, residential zone. It's not like that. Something like the international zone has its, I would say, antecedents in the ideal of human unity. Sri Aurobindo's ideal of human unity. And Auroville, especially this particular zone, is like the culminating point of the whole experiment and almost of their whole adventure of their yoga. So we are there to make it happen. And in the international zone, I mean, if one goes back into the ideal of human unity, the words that kind of come back to us in a very potent way, when he has this chapter called the conditions for the free grouping of mankind. And almost as the entire international zone with each nation soul is there to bring together this free grouping as a part of its evolution. And as we grow in that unending education of the consciousness of Auroville, this is something which will gradually mature. We're not there, but it is something which has to mature through us, through successive generations. Hopefully, the sooner the better. So over there in the ideal of human unity, he mentioned something like a free world union must in its very nature be a complex unity based on diversity. So that again, we have 60 nations in Auroville right now. So this, with 60 nations, with 60 expressions of the soul, let us say, and there are apparently 192 nations that we have to one day accommodate. So the richness, the diversity has to be built into this unity that Auroville aspires for, and which I would say the international zone is almost like a laboratory for the theory and the practice, not just of Auroville, but by taking along with us the people of the world. The other thing he says is it would regard mankind as one single nation. So that complete sense of unity towards which the world is laboring to move towards. And for this realization, the elimination of war and the recognition of the equal rights of all people as intimately bound up with each other. So we'll come to that, but this is almost the key element. And this automatically brings in the question of an interdependence of those nation souls. And the will to be permanently, this interdependence needs a will to be permanently accepted if we want to move towards that unification. So if I just want to, let's say, if I just travel back a little bit, because Auroville, as I said, it is not just an idea, it is the making of that idea. So when the mother started off Auroville, she started it off as a city, and that is the most interesting thing about it, which contains every aspect of human life, human society, human endeavor. And in that what did she start off with, which is very fascinating. She calls an architect first thing, and she gives him a little drawing. Vladimir, would you like to put that up? So she gives him this very simple sketch, which has a center, and it has 4 zones. And in these 4 zones, you will see there is something called the cultural zone, the residential zone, the industrial zone, and the international zone. Now, Auroville, on its birthday, on the 28th of February, was announced as a city of universal culture. And what is so interesting is that we have two zones of culture. We have the cultural zone and the international zone. And they have, in this, of course, it doesn't quite correspond over here. She has just named the zones over here, which all meet at the center. To manifest this idea, it took about 3 years. And perhaps the next slide can come in. Yeah. All right. So you see, it started as a vision for the mother, as soaring, something soaring above the Earth's atmosphere. She talks about that in 1954. That there was this consciousness soaring above the Earth's atmosphere, waiting to come down, and it needed new forms to be absorbed on Earth. And until that came down in 1956, there was nothing happened. But soon after that 1956 event happened, there was a search for a piece of land. And once the piece of land was identified, she called upon an architect, and she gave him this sketch, which you see on your screen on the left-hand side. And so the architect comes up with a very conventional model, nicely drawn in very great detail, but which apparently she doesn't even bother to look at. He brings her another model, which is this concentric circle that you see in the middle, in the middle center column, which was called the Nebula, and which she's very pleased with. But as the architect would later say, it resembled a little bit a military town. So he followed her instructions, and it went to the next stage, and it went to the next stage. So you see this spiraling form coming down slowly there. And in this, there are the 4 zones. The 4 zones that were named here are integrated in this place. If you just go to the next one. Can we go to the next one? Yeah. So this is how it, no, the one before that. The one before that. Vladimir, can we go to the one before that? What happened? Yeah. So if you see this, I need that one. Can I see that one? Okay. No, the one before, just before. Yeah. No, the second one. The third slide, right? Yeah. So what you see here is all these zones, the residential, the cultural, the industrial, they all have their space. This is the tiniest one. And what is interesting is in '68, we had a number of countries in the world, and those numbers have now increased. So what you see here is not each nation building each little pavilion, but they're already clusters. And when you see the movement of the world going from nation states to this free federation of mankind, he talks about the growing sense of free grouping of different types of people. It doesn't have to be related to a nation, doesn't have to be related to a culture. And they will find their unity through common aspiration, common goals. So already this idea of continental clusters was already there, either continental clusters or regional clusters. And eventually there was another map which comes later, where you see how the world is progressing. And I find that this international zone is possibly the most not flexible, is the one which is growing with the world. It is one which is growing with the sense of all these nations going through so many upheavals, so many changes, so many reformulation of themselves, redesigning of themselves, and redesigning of the way the world each nation is now starting to correspond and starting to almost reorganize the world by all, whatever else that we are seeing right now, however very painful it may be. Which is, I mean, like I was thinking, should we talk about these things? But even what we go through in Oroville is nothing to be shirked or disregarded. It is something which is taking us somewhere, and it is perhaps the moment not to actually, how shall I say, to affirm what Oroville is all about. So whatever changes and disruptions and everything which may be apparent on the surface, but beneath it, it is still Oroville, which has to emerge, which has to keep coming over in open ground. So after this was there, this was planted in 1968. The first thing, as we know, it was the Matri Mandir, the soul of Oroville. So again, back to the soul. So for Oroville to manifest the soul of the world, the soul of the nations, it has to first identify and plant and seed its own soul. And that was the Matri Mandir. And the mother, when she wrote the charter, she started writing that belongs to nobody in particular, belongs to humanity as a whole. And then she says, I'm not going to talk about citizens, none of that. I'm saying, but to live in Oroville, one must be a willing servitor of the divine consciousness. And then she says, that is what the Matri Mandir is at the center. We're not saying it here, but that is what it is. So it was a conscious decision. It's not just a little design or a little blob which has been put there. It's a very conscious act which has been done for the earth, for humanity. So there you have the concept. And what is interesting, as soon as she starts Matri Mandir, she calls for a design. I think there were about 5 or 6 designs which are presented to her. And then she accepts one. And in the same year, 1970, she launches the design competition for Bharat Niwas. So she was actually starting the international zone, the very first zone of the whole town, and the very first, let's say, realization point of the city after Matri Mandir. So that was how important it was for her, the international zone. And that's why the next slide is very interesting. If you could go to that, Vladimir, the next one, yeah, number 4. Yeah. So here, in 1969, there was a master plan study which had to be done to raise funds for Oroville. And here, I mean, all this was done with the mother. And she says that the realization of the town plan has to begin from 2 poles. And the first pole was the international zone, and the second pole was the cultural zone, linked together through the Matri Mandir, which runs through the middle there. And these are the real zones of, I would say, conscious action of this universal town. The 2 points of culture, the town of universal culture, right? So these are the 2 cultural zones. And this is another map, which is in the same study, which is actually the study for the first detailing of the crown is done here, to show that it's kind of holding together all the different parts of the town. So you see, it's this the cultural zone on one side on your right, and the international zone seeping over from the left, and that little blob in the middle, that little black patch, initially was called the University of Peace. So this whole culminating region of the international zone, which would bring all these cultures so much potential, so much capacity, so much invention, knowledge of all these cultures, variety, diversity, all that comes, and it is aimed towards what is now called CIRU, the Center, the International Center of Research for Human Unity. So same thing, International University for Peace. And peace is the center of Oroville, the peace area. That's also the whole thing. So all these things come together. And this is just the visual part. So whatever is material is so imbued with what the actual work of Auroville is. I mean, we may build Matri Mandir, plant this, or build a house or whatever, but the intention underlying is much bigger than us. And that is what carries us, whether we are conscious of it or not. It doesn't matter, it's just carrying us all. So just a minute, I'll just try and find, how do I reduce this? Okay, so one of the things that, I don't know, maybe I'm going on for too long. Should we let Jaya come in at this point, or should I carry on a little bit more?
Go. Carry on a bit more.
Okay. So again, the evolution from this point of the nation soul, when you're looking at the free federation of mankind, is that it is not even bound. First, there was this idea of the culture. Yeah, this is a very important point. From the very first brochure that was made, it was never called a national pavilion. It was called a cultural pavilion of each nation. And she brings up all this in her very first conversation in 1965, in June 1965. And when she made that drawing, when she shared that very first flower drawing of the 4 zones, and she says that we have already started contacting the embassies, and they can come here and they can, you know, make a big or a small facility as whatever capacity they have. You can have a hostel, can have some, you know, place for a kitchen, can have guest spaces and all that. So it's, you know, it's something which is kind of bubbling over there. At the same time, she has already, how to say, she has already started that very practical, pragmatic, material momentum, which is actually aimed at the realization of Sri Aurobindo's ideal of human unity. And that material link with the conscious soul. So this is where I've been very fascinated by the way this work for Auroville was carried out always. So it seemed that she was very busy and getting this done, getting that done, but the undercurrent was always to achieve that greater, let's say, target for humanity. So that is one thing. And then, as we saw, you know, the first pavilion, which was Bharat Nivas, which is the soul of India. So India was somehow placed at a central position around which the rest of the world would sort of, you know, be placed. But of course, this is the one pavilion with the largest, you know, land area. But not every country can have so much land, because as you can see, it's a much smaller, you know, space in the overall city plan. So then there was this question of, okay, there's so many, Europe went through so many changes. Asia went through changes. So how the number of countries we started out with is not the same. And yet there are the how to say, the cultural connections are all there. At the same time, we have also seen the world grow in a way that soul connection is possibly, I mean, of course, it is related to the place, related to the geography, related to the culture. But I think at a point of the real soul realization, it will transcend all those borders. So then the architect comes up with this plan, which I was always fascinated by, because it almost looks like a fractal design, you know. And basically what it allows is a lot of capacity, space, buildings, everything, for a lot of things to happen. Nothing is getting canceled, but there's space for people to move from one area to another area, and their facilities. You could be under a very large free hanging roof under which many things are many facilities are assembled, many things, and could be interchangeable. And we're actually looking at, once the international zone grows, right now, I mean, it's quite dormant. And I think in Oroville, we've been feeling that this is the one zone which started the first it was started by the mother, and somehow it's been very dormant. And perhaps it needed the right impulse to move ahead. And okay, we'll talk about that later. I think I'll pass it on to Jaya now.
Okay. Okay. Am I on?
Yes, yes, go right ahead.
So I will take over where Anu goes here. So during this week, I have been listening to the two talks by Dr. Sumitra Banu and by Dr. Alok Pandey. I have been reading Wolfgang Aurose's book on the nation soul, where he goes very much into the shadow side and the shadow work, as he calls it. Of course, Mother Sri Aurobindo's, I've looked what they have been saying, and I have gone back to Kailash Javeri's booklet or little brochure, which was prepared for UNESCO and which Mother had approved. And it is interesting when Kailash, she told me that when she had prepared the brochure for UNESCO, there were two versions. The first one, Mother discarded completely and immediately. And then she went back home and then she did this second brochure where she basically has based herself completely in Sri Aurobindo's writings. And Mother was very, very happy when she received it. I'm going to read a few pieces from the introduction. And it is called, like Anu said, cultural pavilions. It is not national pavilions, but cultural pavilions. So she starts with culture in its root sense implies the cultivation of man's consciousness. It reflects his awakening to the realities of life and the universe and their multiple relationships. It represents his growing experience of nature, man, God, and himself at the individual and collective level. The experience is formulated through artistic creativity, intellectual pursuit, practical organization of life, religious forms, and spiritual aspiration. All these activities make for the complex content of each of the numerous cultures of the world. That's the very first introduction. Then she goes on, or they go on to speak of evolution of consciousness, where it says that this new consciousness, which Sri Aurobindo calls supermind or the truth consciousness, has an intrinsic vision of all things as a multiple unity. So it goes very fast too. It goes with the culture, it goes to the unity. And then it talks about Oroville as a field of development for a new world culture. Evidently, since the culture of the new man moving towards the supermind will represent the qualities of the universal consciousness in its multiple dimensions, it will need a new field for its outflowering. Oroville, a universal township dedicated to the whole of humanity, offers itself as an experimental base and seeks to provide this field. The project of the permanent cultural pavilions is therefore undertaken by Oroville to fulfill the conditions of life necessary for this experiment and to prepare men to manifest the new force of consciousness. I started to work with the International Zone in the 90s, kind of mid-90s. Together with Jill, I was doing the coordination of the International Zone. Observing the work and the discussions and what we were going through and the pavilion groups. And we were at that time, much fewer countries represented in Oroville. Today we are 60. I don't know if we were even 20 countries at that time, and not so many active in the International Zone. We had a few countries who were working on actually manifesting the pavilions very strongly, who have been doing this from the beginning. The French, the German, the African had come into the picture. And I was at that time, when the Unity Pavilion came up to create the Unity Pavilion, it was very much based in the fact that there was a sense of it has to be based in unity. It has to work towards unity. Everybody is so concerned with showing their culture, their thing. People would go on the land and look for a good spot, and the zone is very small, the international zone. So I kind of got the feeling it was a bit like when I was a kid and we played on the tarmac, and we played a game where you would stand on one foot and stretch the other one out. And you would take land, and you would call yourself a country, and you would take land, and you could stand on that, and you could take other land. We had no idea it was an imperialistic game. We didn't know what imperialism was at that time, no. But I got the feeling we are still playing this. We have a very strong ethics of human unity. We have strong aspiration for it, but we actually don't know how to do it. We miss it all the time. So it was like, how can the Unity Pavilion was the raison d'etre was to, how can we build an awareness which includes everybody? We're actually, instead of looking out for the best place for our country, we will at least at the same time look out so that the country that comes last will have the best place if possible. How do we shift our consciousness to long for everybody else at the same time as we hold the preciousness of our own? It was it became very important for me. And when we started to work with the Unity Pavilion, and this concept came up and was discussed in the international zone group, then we were also asked, well, if you're doing this project, could you house the peace table there? So we felt, yes, that is possible, because it's actually peace table had arrived to Oroville in, I think, 95 or 96. And we didn't have any official places to keep it. It was moving around a bit. It was in Bharat Nivas, was in House of Mother's Agenda. Okay, so we said yes. So actually the Hall of Peace has landed as a part of the Unity Pavilion. So somehow this was something which we had not foreseen, but which happened. And yes, how shall I put it? In this work of moving towards the international zone as a place for everybody, for all the cultures, we have been having cultural programs, cultural events, but I think that we are still not at the point of actually looking out, how do we get everybody in? We are still not really striving very strongly to bring in the other parts of the world. I don't know exactly how to address it. It will happen maybe by itself as we get larger and larger. We have now much more with the whole Asia, Southeast Asia has come in through Korea and China, etc., Japan, but it needs more attention, more sight on that. And I feel that that is kind of missing in most of the discussions and most of the talk we have. We are still very focused on our own countries. I wanted to in that context, to look at the map of the international zone. I had shown Vladimir, the one, I think it's the second last one, or third last one, this one here. When you look here, you will see that it is very different from what we have presently, in that the groupings, there are about 10 or 12 groupings in the area. And this actually holds, for me, much more the space and possibility of collaboration not country by country like we very much have with the European Pavilion, but that you actually have these free formations where countries can move and move together, not so strictly, maybe even in the continental areas. It gives much more space for that. And I have seen, for example, that we have talked much about the Scandinavian pavilions, because of course I'm Swedish, so I've been part of that. But today I think we see a possibility that it's not only the 5 Scandinavian pavilions, but we could very well also connect with the other Baltic countries, like Estonia and Lithuania and Latvia, that could be a spontaneous formation that could happen. And we have seen with the African pavilion that is very clearly a pavilion for all the African countries. And we have also seen now that the last 4 or 5 years, what happened with the Russian and many of the East European countries that formed the Brotherhood Pavilion. Of course, we don't know what is happening now because of the war with Ukraine and how it is continuing. But that part actually has been developing. So there has been a kind of movement more than before towards collaboration around it, and to have a pavilion which is larger, which is not just country identified. So, yes, I would like to take a pause there and look back at my material. You can hand over to Anu.
Yeah, I was just, as you spoke, I thought of a couple of other things. And one was, I used to always wonder why it was so important for the mother to start with the international zone. She could have started with the residential zone, she could have started with the cultural zone. Why was that so important? And then I found back this conversation she has in 1964. And when she says that the dream had been sent to both Kennedy and Khrushchev, and they had both been very enthusiastic about it. And the idea of a small international center had been proposed where people or countries which were, who had difficulties or were at war or were in conflict, would find a place where people from those countries could come and actually start to work together, the spirit of mutuality, the spirit of collaboration, all that. So that was seeded somewhere, that with the dream, we don't realize what they were seeding with the ideal of human unity, this experiment. And what is also very interesting is that when she launched the competition, the design competition for Bharat Nivas, they said will be in the international sector known as the zone of union. It's something we have to kind of reassert for international. It's the zone of union. So it's really the culminating point of this human unity, not just within Oroville, but Oroville and the rest of the world. So that was one very beautiful thing. And when she, and last time, I think Alok Pandey, he said something very interesting. It was very to the point. He said, nations, we set out to find the nation's soul, but in the end, you just end up with a national ego. And that is the antithesis of consciousness, because the ego is the one thing which stands in the way of unity, always. So, and that is the endeavor we are all going through all over the world, very much in Oroville too. But I think that's the thing to be surpassed. I mean, they look simple. We have to transcend the ego. We have to have goodwill. Goodwill is such a simple, innocent word, but it is like the crux of it all, to drop things, to let it go. And that's the first thing, even before reading the charter, that is read, an invitation to all men of goodwill. So,
can I ask a question to this? Why Mother created this international zone? Of course, it is in the charter, the embodiment of actual human unity. This is the ideal of Oroville and all the nations. But she created it as a cultural pavilions to learn about different cultures, that we start appreciating each other's uniqueness and richness, because this richness is to be preserved. Otherwise, we will come to uniformity of some kind, which won't be our ideal. Ideal is not a uniformity. It's much more to preserve all the beauties, all the flowers, all the flora. Yes, we need roses, we need lotuses, we need also small flowers from the fields. They're also adding some very unique fragrance to this bouquet of nations. So if we start cutting off everything and leaving only roses, it won't be the human unity of some kind. Yeah, it would be something else, and it will start stagnating, as Sri Aurobindo says. If we would not support the individual and unique development, stagnation would be the result, and then everything. And I see this stagnation in some sense, and some unique development in the world also. European Union is a unique development. Countries live without borders, and they don't interfere, they do not attack each other, they don't have even an idea of having an army even to protect themselves. You see, it went far, this development of Sri Aurobindo's thought. And I think international zone will play some occult role in that, and in the future has to play more that role of union of nations and learning from each other. Do you think so? I'm just sharing with you my thoughts on this also.
I think that, yeah, can I?
Yeah,
I think
please.
it's very clear. I think there is nothing in Oroville that is not put in place with an occult force behind it and an action which comes. I think we thought that human unity was much easier than it was. I think we thought that we had the intention was sufficient. And then, so I think it has been a little bit a hard learning to see that actually it is not that easy. And it is interesting. That was also why I mentioned all what I had been doing these last weeks and reading and listening, because I think that all these different approaches are very necessary, and they all form part of what's happening, because it is for the people to come and learn about the other cultures. It's also for ourselves to learn to appreciate and deeply, how to say, embody our own cultures on a very deep level, what it is it's bringing, and it is the education, like Helmut Ernst is talking about, and it is the shadow side, and it is all these things. And then beyond and behind all these things, there is the consciousness, there is the supramental, there is the matrimandir, there is what the whole of the galaxy represents in its physical embodiment, which is changing us also. So I think the fact that these pavilions are situated in Oroville, not just pavilions somewhere, but in Oroville, that is part of this whole, it's, with the galaxy spinning, everything permeates everything. So the setting is also there. So all these aspects coming together, and I had written here, that how is it, for me as a member or representing a pavilion, how important is it for me that all the other pavilions are there too? That must be as important. If there's, I think there's Anu said 192, I always count 200 plus minus countries in the world. And countries is one thing, but the streaming of culture, it's like rivers. If you look at Africa, you can't talk about countries in the same way, but culture moves and blends and enriches everywhere. The whole Slavic movement, and I was just, about reading about Greece, that Greece is all that has all the people who live there are not from the old sources, but when you are living in a country, it also grows you completely, In America, you have this huge mass of people that has come from all over Europe and the world, and they are all Americans. They are all nurtured by the land, by the body of the earth, which is different expressions. I lived in India half my life. I am definitely very Indian. Here I look very Swedish. When I'm in India and in Sweden, I don't look so Swedish at all, you know, because so much has shifted in me from simply living in this land. No, so I think it is. I think these pavilions have a very, very deep meaning and expression, which goes all the way from what Mother says when she says, and there will be the food, and there will be this, and where there will be this, and it goes all the way to what Sri Aurobindo, how he puts it in the most, you know, I don't know how to call what Sri Aurobindo says, in the most perfect ways about, talks about whether it's about the ego or about unity or the diversity, how all this comes together. And this is the magic of Auroville, that all this will be happening here. And that force, what you mentioned, that is behind it.
Thank you very much. This is a very good, yes, assertive way of looking at it. And I think this transition through the ego formation in the nations is an inevitable passage. It's like a transitional zone. It's not really the final end. It's the dangers about which Aurobindo speaks in the human cycle and the ideal of human unity, that this transition will take place. And we learned from, for example, Germany, how it happened to be very dangerous for the whole world. So that learning experience is very precious for us, because we see where we should not go, where we should not, exaggerate the vital desires and assertion and militant part of the nationalism. There is also a positive part of nationalism, loving your country. And loving you don't need to hate others to love your country, you know. And once you learn to love your country, you can appreciate others and really enjoy, from the spiritual point of view, all the unique differences of other cultures. It's really there. We can feel it in Auroville. Auroville is the place where these things are becoming possible, I think, at least. And in the world in general. Thank you for the sharing. It was beautiful, Jaya. Thank you.
There's just one little thing I was thinking of, is that when they announced this competition for Bharat Nivas as a zone of union, so of course they speak of all the culture, the literature, the habits, the customs, you know, even cooking, even sports, the gardens, the natural forest. So all this is part of the nation. So actually, like, each one carries such deep imprints, not only of those facets, but of the history, or what has happened through, whether it is the spiritual history, the actual, you know, let's say the conventional history of what happens in the passage of time. So all that is part of somebody's being. And yet, when she talks about these cultural pavilions, she says, we take all that, but we move towards the future. At every step that you do all that, but you move. And even the architecture of each place will derive from, you know, the knowledge, the tradition and everything, but it has to create a new step forward. And it even goes, that text even goes so far as to say it should not copy or you know, things like the normal artisana and the you know, the artifacts and the archaeological you know, elements of that culture. It has to create something. It's really that movement that you touch that soul and then you pull it forward. You know, it has that. So that is the laboratory this international zone is. You know, that everybody comes with that wealth of experience, that wealth of human, social, whatever, national, cultural experience. But all that has to now be moved forward in this place. And that can only happen through the power of consciousness, through that power of greater unity.
You know that Sri Aurobindo says about 3 steps of Vishnu, and this is a very unique statement. He says the first step of Vishnu was the creation of the family, love within the family, psychic relations, the motherly love, all that instinct in nature is already inbuilt. The second step is nations. It is within the nations that psychic love, that brotherhood can manifest through language, common history, common culture. We need all the instruments to express it, to be able to express intimate, most innermost movements, feelings, and the third step, then, once we learn, it's a learning ground, nation souls, would be the human unity. Only then it is becoming possible. So you can see the role of the pavilions in this case, that we all learn to appreciate and to enjoy the richness of the cultures and nations to move forward. But he also warns us in the first chapter of the ideal of human unity that the unity which is achieved very fast, bypassing those elements of national development, nations, will come to the end of stagnation and will have no result, because it will start dominating the individual development. Individuals are to be accepted and to be supported first of all. And if society is not supporting the individual development, it will come to stagnation and collapse.
Mm.
It's quite
Yes.
amazing what he gives us. He gives us the vision, the knowledge which could guide us in the building of our will. Yes. So
Yeah, I mean,
lovely.
it's a pity Pashi is not with us to talk about Siru, but Siru has a very important role there for another time.
Right. We can bring this topic in our meeting on UNESCO, which we will have on 24th of September. By the way, it's a good time to announce this. On 10 o'clock, the same time, we will have a meeting on UNESCO and Auroville, and there we can touch upon Sirhu and other projects, and again come back with the Unity Pavilion, this idea of all the nations learning from each other and growing into the new quality of human unity. And now I would like to address some questions here, and also if Radhe or HP Rama is with us, would like to ask or to add something, please go ahead.
This
Unmute.
is HP Rama. I would like to share that the mother's vision of international zone is already existing in a different way in America at Epcot Center in Disney World in Orlando. And if anybody has visited, they will see that there are about 8-9 different countries pavilion already built. And they represent their culture, the music, the handicraft, the food, architectural expression of that country. And it's very distinct, and all are in a circular form. And it is a very amazing experience that you can visit in 2-3 hours, different culture within one park. It's already existing. So I invite all of you to look at Epcot Center. And the name Epcot means Environmental Prototype Community of Tomorrow. That's what Mother envisioned. And look what happened. Disney already did it. And if you go into the Epcot, the first sphere of exhibit where you go through is a globe like Matra Mandir, as big as that. And it's in silver. So what I'm saying is, what Mother envisioned already manifested our international zone in America, but without any soul in it. It is more physical expression of what she envisioned.
Yeah, very true.
You know that mother loved Disney, and she spoke so highly about Mickey Mouse and the whole idea of that, what Disney was doing. She was saying that Mickey Mouse was the symbol of the psychic being. Can you imagine? It's in their agenda. It's something has to do with Disney, of this kind of quality of life, of this beauty and, you know, no vulgarity. It's a very different being in a way. And of course, I am not even wondering that such Santa could appear somewhere in Disneyland.
Yeah.
Yes, would you like Radha to add something or to share your thoughts on the US, why US could be also, US is very international in a way. It has international spirit.
Well, thank you, but I think let's go to the Q&A because we don't have many minutes left here.
All right. So the question number one on the slide 5, A is India, Bharat Nivas. Is it so? Shall I look?
Yeah, let's just look at that.
Let me see. Let me project it. Wait a minute. Here we are. Slide 5 is here, and A is.
Yeah, this one, yeah, it's true.
It is this
If you
India.
come towards the residential zone, yeah, over here with that little triangulated, yeah.
This is
so-
Bharat Nivas. Yeah.
Yeah, this is where it is actually placed at the center of the whole zone. But what you see in the original Galaxy model, there's something which almost looks like that. And it looks, you know, as part of little clusters in the middle of a big park. So something similar
great.
there. Yeah.
Okay, next question. How does other zones come into play? For example, industrial zone and others. How are they organized? What was Mother's vision with nations participating in these zones?
Who wants to take it? Jaya, you want to take it? I can take it also, but you go ahead also if you want.
I think I can only say that I think that help to create Oroville would be coming from the world, no? And but if it was specifically related to the international zone, would then be more on the level of research, I would say, like with CIRU. What is said in the charter also, that all research inner and outer. And there, I think the international zone has CIRU is placed in the international zone on the Matti Mandir side, no? So I think that there it would come in, this relationship, but otherwise I don't know about anything specific. Do you, Anu?
See, I mean, on the face of it, the 4 zones look pretty banal, but actually they are creating a very, to use that word, holistic growth of the overall human being in this town. So you have the place where people can live, which is a residential zone. People can actually live in different parts also, but that is the main space. And to sustain this town's growth and development, you have that's what the industrial zone was created for, actually. There's a lot of very ambitious programs to really be able to generate not only innovative, you know, products or whatever, and business models, but something and a totally different relationship to money. That was equally part of the industrial zone. And it was actually called the economic zone. So that would sustain the whole town. And what does it actually sustain? What do these people who are living there and this industrial zone, which is trying to sustain the town, what does it do? It actually sustains the experiment, which is this universal town of culture. So you have the cultural zone and you have the international zone. So they all work in tandem, and they all work in tandem through that center point, which is the point of consciousness. So
And
everything.
by the way, yeah.
Right.
I
I'm
think
just saying
also
that,
if you,
go ahead, Jai.
no, I just want to say that it's too long to go into, but if you look at the layout of the matrix sort of the city, with the Matrimandi and the oval island, and how the gardens, how we have the petals and the gardens and the powers, how that is situated. Mother had said for Oroville in 71, you know, she had been working with these 12 qualities. You can find it already back in her symbol in 1910 and 12, no? And then in 27, and then in the 50s. And then she says to Satprem, when he asks her on behalf of Rocher, she says the first 8 relate towards our attitudes towards the divine, and the last 4, our attitude towards humanity. And if you actually look at the matrix of the Matrimandir Oval Island, you will see that those 8 are basically sitting where you have the industrial zone, the cultural zone and residential zone. And the 4 which are towards humanity, they sit on the west side, which goes out into the international zone. And in the gardens, you have those 4 petals, they go into the 4 gardens, which are related towards humanity also. So it's a very interesting, because it gives the sense that the city, the 3 zones of the city is actually the place, the yoga, the practice in all the aspects of the life. And then you have this energy that it actually has this movement outwards into the world. It's the interaction with the world, the international zone. And of course, this is a movement. It's not one piece here and one piece there, no, but it's very, very interesting. But it's takes a long time to fully go into it and look at the images and like that. But it is deeply interesting. And Alok Pandey had a talk not so long ago where he talks about the crown as the Sudarshan chakra, and it really puts the whole image in place, what the physical city of the galaxy is about, how each element has a very, very great significance. It is not something which is random. Mother has put something in place here, which we will explore for a long, long time to come, deepening and deepening. We are scratching the surface, very much scratching the surface. And as our consciousness grows, we will be able to see more and more and work with what is happening here.
Thank you very much for this. This is a very good insight that Mahasaraswati is turned towards humanity, and the whole international zone is dealing exactly with that, how humanity is to come together. Excellent point. There is another question here from Bahman Shirazi, who is a member of the CIAS, Californian Institute of Integral Studies. It seems to me that just as on the individual level, one needs to have a vision of a future evolved or transformed version of oneself, same is needed for global unity. Is there an initiative yet for a group in Oroville to envision what future human unity will be like in practice? That is, to explore what human unity means in practical terms, who we become actually on the individual level.
Actually, it's a very good question, if I may just jump in, because I keep going back to the moment when we arrived in Oroville and there was nothing except that we had to build the Matrimandir. And it was hands-on, you know, it was your spanner and the hammer and everything and the pipes and all that. That unity will have to come, you know, Oroville is a space of work. And it's the karma yoga is what leads us, but not just random work and running around doing stuff. It's that capacity to put consciousness through work in everything we do and in everything we develop. You know, development sometimes looks like a very a word that a lot of people don't like. But by developing whatever is around you, you develop, you know, the society, you develop yourself first. And And the more you grow in that, you grow with each other. So that is the space. Now, in practical terms, where is it going? We do have groups off and on in the international zone, but I think there is a moment, there is an impetus, there feels that there is an impetus, and it needs to grow, because if so much importance was given by the mother that she started the international zone first, and to see all the feelers that she sent out in the world, we have to start thinking about it in a much more concerted way. And what she started with, and she wanted that, she wanted each nation to be involved, not to magnify the nation, but to take it forward, so that every nation which comes and is involved by itself and with each other, with other nation states who are there, it's to that capacity to work together. It's a place where all these people, so people who are coming into Oroville, who are in the international zone, in the cultural zone, they have a certain work. This is a different kind of work, which then has to merge with Oroville's work. And now I think is the time, and a lot of people are talking about it now. And there have been, interactions with the embassies and things like that, because that is an aspect of Oroville which makes it this universal international town. It's not just limited self-seeking, self-look regarding. It has to relate to the world. It has to work with the world. And that connection was very important. I hope that answers. Jaya, if you have something to add.
No, I just, the only thing which comes to me is the fact that we are so very self-critical in Oroville, and we go through our difficulties. But the fact is that we do get a taste of what is possible and what is coming now. In the middle of all the difficulties we go through, there is still this strong sense of love and beyond. So it is kind of, I feel that we are kind of like in a continuous drizzle of gold, and we don't feel it all the time, but when we feel it, it's so very much there. So I do think that in the preparation within ourselves, much more has happened than we give credit for. At the same time, as we have a long way to go. But I feel that the reality that when you go through difficulties, and you might, we all are reactive and like that also, but then when it quiets down and you look at it, then you know that it's something we go through, and it's a kind of a veil over other things, and it is forces and it's stuff, but it doesn't get personalized in the same way anymore. There are distinct qualities which are there, and in many people. So I think it is, I have difficult to kind of which words to use for it, but I know that sweetness when I taste it, of a kind of a love for people and a joy, in the fellow human beings, even beyond the difficulties. So I think things are happening, and Orville matrimony is very, very powerful. You have all this harmony and things which are going on. You walk into the gardens and you take a walk around, and it's gone out of your system. It's that strong. It doesn't chew in your head anymore.
Maybe that's why the difficulties are sent, because there is a greater capacity of love is to manifest. So Thank you. This is very, very insightful. And there is one more question we will take, and then we will stop. Does the cultural pavilions not imply that in Oroville are people, students from all nations, cultures, living their culture in all aspects in these pavilions, inviting all the other people, students to join and enjoy? Does it not imply that the nations home cultures support these pavilions by sending people and students to Oroville and support this also materially and financially. This is from Helmut Ernst.
Yes.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Mm.
I mean, that is so much part of the international zone. I mean, it's even the planning of each zone is very much factored in with student hostels and student guest houses, and even within the city, not just limited to international zone itself, but even in different parts of the city, there has to be, I mean, we're looking at even the growth of, say, collective housing or lines of force, that each of them would have automatically, student zones or, youth zones and stuff like that. So, I mean, most of us came very young to Oregon, and that energy needs to keep coming. And if we can help that energy to come in through government, each national government support in any way through universities or what, that's something we're also trying to explore now, because that
Yes.
there is a potential for that. And definitely that element of the world's coexistence will be done by the youth and the students. Yeah.
I think one can add that presently there is actually ongoing work to put such a program in place, no? With the invitations going out to students in all countries, to major universities, etc. So it's being itself also.
We'll sort of hatch that when we have a little more, we're working on it, but it's to make things easy. It's to be more welcoming, to make it, facilitate many more options for people. And also, you see, when people come, there has to be enough housing, there has to be enough places they can work. Otherwise, very often people come and then they hang out and there's nothing to do because nothing's happening. Whereas Oroville has to be the most happening place, on the one hand, on the external, but also the very happening place inwardly. But the two have to meet, you can't just sit and meditate and nothing else happens. But, that beauty of making both things merge as part of your life experience. So we're working on that. So we will let you know as soon as that comes to some kind of clarity. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you so much for this beautiful presentation and the hope for humanity and for all of us. If we manage it in Oroville, I'm sure there will be a spiritual change in the world. And so we invite you again to come to the UNESCO our webinar on 24th of September at 10 o'clock, the same time. So we would discuss this UNESCO project and how UNESCO can help and how Oroville can help UNESCO and the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anu and Jaya. And before people leave, I just wanted to mention that in the chat box, there's two different links there that I've posted. One is for the information regarding our one-day event on October 8th that I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. And then the second one is a link that we are putting all these recordings on Nation Souls. This entire series will be kept in this particular Vimeo collection. So that link there that currently has Dr. Basu's and Dr. Pandey's video, but we'll also be including this one later today. And as Vladimir mentioned, the 24th UNESCO, but also next week we have the 4th in this series. And we have as panelists joining us, Dr. Martha Orton, Gerard Quirk, and Vladimir will be the three panelists, and they will discuss two topics, nations and federations, and the second topic, positive and negative nationalism. So if you're registered, you'll continue to get the Zoom links. No need to go back out and register again. And just want to thank you again, Anu and Jaya, for just a wonderful and insightful discussion and talk.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Okay. Namaste.